How many murders do you think Larry Hoover is responsible for? In 1978, Larry Hoover forever changed America's criminal underworld when he organized Chicago's street gangs into the Folks Nation and the People's Nation, while locked up behind bars in Statesville Prison. In 1978, Larry Hoover also asked a man named Ernest Wilson to remain loyal to him following the chaos that occurred in Disciples' leadership after King David Barksdale died. 40 years later, in 2018, Ernest Wilson, one of the founders of the insane gangster Disciples and the infamous Cabrini Green projects, and a long-serving board member with close ties to the chairman, better known as Don Smokey, was murdered on the streets of Chicago, and the government would like everyone to believe that Larry Hoover, who has been locked up in Supermax custody inside ADX Florence, the Alcatraz of the Rockies, since 1997, orchestrated his death from prison. On today's show, we'll reveal the sordid history between Larry Hoover, Don Smokey, and Black Disciples leaders Don Dirk and Jerome, King Shorty Freeman. We also asked these questions. First, was it possible for Chairman Larry Hoover to appoint Anthony Dobbins and Warren Big Head Griffin to the board of directors in 2014, while he was locked up in America's most secure prison? And if so, is he responsible for them killing Don Smokey in 2018? How many murders do you think Larry Hoover is responsible for? This is the Cartoon News Network. We report. You decide.
In 1961, the chief of the Devil's Disciples, Richard Strong, moved from the south side of Chicago to the Cabrini Green projects, on the city's near north side, leaving leadership of the Disciples, which was founded in 1958, to a 14-year-old named David Barksdale. Strong quickly developed a following, and was the shot caller for the Black Deuces, or Blacks, which eventually reunited with the Devil's Disciples to form the gang that we know of today as the Black Disciples. Richard Strong's right-hand man was Ernest Wilson, aka Smokey. Larry Hoover assumed leadership of the Supreme Gangsters in 1965. In June 1969, David Barksdale and Larry Hoover formed the Black Gangster Disciples Nation, when they united the Black Disciples and Supreme Gangster street gangs into one nation, with two kings. King David ruled over the Disciples, and gangs that were recruited to join them took the Disciples' name. For instance, the Gonzados became Gonzado Disciples. King Hoover ruled over the gangsters, and gangs that were recruited to join them added gangster to their name, like the Imperial Gangsters. In 1970, Smokey was convicted of aggravated assault and sentenced to 1 year in jail. 3 years later, Smokey was convicted of armed robbery and locked back up again. After David Barksdale died in 1974, Don Smokey was the highest-ranking disciple on the streets of the North Side because Richard Strong was killed prior to King David's death, but as you'll soon see, Don Smokey spent much of his life in prison. In 1975, Don Smokey was convicted of voluntary manslaughter. Now, here's where things get interesting. In 1976, Dirk Acklin, aka Don Dirk, attempted to unify the Disciples when he wrote their literature and bylaws in Cook County Jail, but many considered this the official break from the concept of one nation, even though Don Dirk remained loyal to King Hoover as the leader of the gangsters. One law prohibited members from fucking the wives and girlfriends of other members. In 1978, Jerome Shorty Freeman was crowned king of the BDs, making the split into two nations, with two kings, official, even though the BDs remained a part of the Folks Alliance. For his part, King Shorty didn't give a fuck about some so-called laws that Don Dirk wrote in jail, and at some point, fucked his wife.
How do you feel about people who say you started your own mob or your own BDs? You know, after everything that happened with King Shorty, because King Shorty had sex with your wife or your girlfriend. Okay, we talking about Colin. Look, here's what happened. We got lost. See, let me go back here. When that incident happened, I told him he broke law. Because see, but I did the same thing that I witnessed disciples messing with disciple women's wives, and respect. We fought each other about that. So as I was writing the law so we wouldn't make them mistakes no more.
Oh, is that your bitch? While she on the hit six with her hand on his dick, keep licking her lip. Is that your bitch? While she on the hit side with her hand on his side, keep licking his eye. Oh, is that your bitch?
Don Smokey was in Statesville prison with Larry Hoover when his partner, Don John, organized a meeting with the disciples in Cabrini Green. While sitting on a park bench, Don John told everybody that they were now insane gangster disciples and outlined his plan for a large-scale drug dealing operation. This is a picture of Don John in Cabrini Green with a Rolls Royce. And this is how the gangster disciples became the predominant force in Chicago's most infamous public housing project. On January 12, 1981, Cedric John Maltbia, the Don of Cabrini Green, was murdered by a 16-year-old boy named Andre Taylor with a sawed-off shotgun. According to a newspaper article, Andre went to an apartment at 862 North Sedgwick Street with his mother, Virgie, and his Aunt Dorothy to retrieve his mom's jewelry. At some point, for some reason, an argument ensued. Then, Aunt Dorothy screamed, "Kill them all." 16-year-old Andre shot and killed Don John, while his mother shot and killed the Don's homie, Derek Montgomery. Andre testified that Don John was trying to recruit him to join the insane gangster disciples. Meanwhile, Don, Dirk and the Beaties in Statesville were starting to piss insane gangster disciple leader, Don Smokey, the fuck off, which would lead to a black disciples member losing his life.
Don Smokey was convicted of conspiracy to murder George Bailey with his co-defendants, Charles Harris and Fred Collins. According to Supreme Court case titled People vs. Harris, the defendants in the instant case, as well as the victim, George Bailey, all resided in Unit B West at Stable Prison on January 29, 1981, when the offense was committed. The facts adduced at trial established that the killing of inmate Bailey resulted from prison gang rivalry, specifically between the Black Gangster Disciples and the Black Disciples. The victim was a member of the Black Disciples. At the time of the murder, Bailey was also a member of a small group of privileged inmates who were assigned duties of cell house help. Inmates assigned to cell house help enjoyed free range of the cell house to the extent that, unlike all other prisoners housed in B West, their cells were unlocked, and they could roam about the cell house uncuffed and unescorted by a prison guard. Defendant Ernest Smokey Wilson, head of the Black Gangster Disciples, disapproved of Black disciples serving as cell house helpers. Approximately 2 weeks prior to the January 29, 1981, murder of George Bailey, Wilson held a meeting of inmates at his cell, to send a message to all Black disciple cell house helpers that they could either resign from their positions as cell house helpers, or join the Black Gangster Disciples. Those in attendance at the meeting included Black Gangster Disciple members Rico Johnson, defendants Fred Collins and Charles Harris, 3 other Black Gangster Disciples, Franklin Murphy, Robert Watson, and Charles Brooks, who were indicted along with Harris, Wilson, and Collins, for the murder of George Bailey, but were tried separately, and convicted only of conspiracy, and 3 Black disciple members, including George Bailey, who were also assigned to cell house help. Although 2 of the Black disciples followed Wilson's suggestion, and resigned their positions as cell house help, Bailey stayed on as cell house help in the B West unit. During the 2-week period preceding the murder, the Black disciples chanted, "BD Power," every night around 8 p.m. Wilson expressed his dissatisfaction with this practice to Dirk Acklin, leader of the Black disciples, but the chanting persisted. Sometime shortly after the meeting at Wilson's cell, defendant Collins was placed in segregation because he had been fighting with Bailey. Collins was returned, however, to the B West unit as a cell house helper on January 29, 1981. On the evening of January 29, 1981, Wilson met in his cell with inmates Moore, Collins, Harris, Murphy, Brooks, and Watson. They smoked some marijuana, and discussed the fate of George Bailey. According to James Bates, a Black disciple housed in the cell adjoining Wilson's, Wilson announced that they should get Bailey. Collins said he intended to get him anyway. Wilson sent Harris to order Rico Johnson to distribute the gang's weapons from his cell where they were stored. At trial, Johnson testified that he gave an aluminum bat to Collins, aka Bobo, and Shanks to Harris, who is known as Sundown, Big Crip, Rob, and Gator. Bates then called Bailey down to his cell to report the conversation he had overheard, in order to warn Bailey that he might be in danger. Bailey, however, expressed no fear, and showed Bates a shank he was carrying for protection. Bates further testified that a unit recount was called at 9:45 p.m., requiring all inmates, including cellhouse help, to return to their cells. According to Bates, Bailey returned to his cell, talked briefly with his cellmate and, moments later, was struck from behind by a baseball bat wielded by Collins. As the guards began to lock up the cellhouse helpers, Bates saw Collins approach Wilson's cell, and signaled to Wilson using gang-related gestures. He overheard Collins remark, "It's taken care of." Bates claimed that, after lockup, he saw Collins throw the bat out of his cell. On February 5, 1981, George Bailey died. The autopsy revealed that his skull had been fractured in several places, consistent with repeated blows from a baseball bat.
Can you clear up the accusations of you snitching on Don Smokey and testifying against some of the executives?
Yeah, let me say this. I was at D house, and the warden came to me because they had put the joint on lockdown. So they were telling me one of my guys got killed, but they got the guys that did, because the GD brother that did it told them that he did it and who told them to do it. You see, so it was a BD involved with telling. His name was James. You see what I'm saying? So at the end of the day, I was asked to get a hold of James. You did what I'm saying, to talk to him, because James had lied. He didn't see nothing. You see what I'm saying? And they gave these brothers life. So we got together, me, a few guys from the street, you did what I'm saying, and we went to court. You see? And when we got in court, we cleared that up. You see what I'm saying? And see, this is what kills me. Why come did none of them guys show their paperwork? But if you ask Sundown and all of them, they'll tell you the truth. If it don't be for me, they'll still be in there. It was my assist when the chairman asked me to do that. It was done.
Oh, is that your bitch? Why she only hit six with a hand on his dick? Keep taking her nip. Is that your bitch? Why she only hit five with a hand on his side? Keep looking at his eye. Oh, is that your bitch?
Well, damn. Ain't that some shit? If you've enjoyed today's show so far, and are not part of the Cartoon News Network family, please share this video, smash that like button, and subscribe. Chairman Larry Hoover told Don Dirk that he needed to get Black Disciples member, James Bates, to stop snitching. You just heard Don Dirk claim that he and a couple of other guys went to the courthouse and took care of everything. Obviously, he's lying. What did Don Dirk take care of? According to court documents, James Bates testified against Don Smokey and was accepted into the Witness Protection Program. So, Don Smokey laid down the law that the BDs had to resign from their positions as cellhouse workers, or get down with the gangsters, or get laid down by the gangsters. All of the BDs listened to Don Smokey, except George Bailey. The BDs start chanting BD power to support Bailey, and Don Smokey didn't like it, so he told Don Dirk, on some guerrilla pimp shit, to get his people in order. When it didn't happen, Don Smokey showed Don Dirk that he was the Don of Dons. After he was released from prison, later that year in 1981, Don Dirk attempted to wrestle control of the BDs from King Shorty, but lost the Civil War to King Shorty in 1982 or 83, just like he lost his bitch to King Shorty.
Oh, is that your bitch? Why she only hit six with a hand on his dick? Keep taking her nip. Is that your bitch? Why she only hit five with a hand on his side? Keep looking at his eye. Oh, is that your bitch?
Larry Hoover, Don Smokey, and the GDs continued to expand their power in the jails and exert influence on the streets of Chicago and from state to state throughout the 1980s and 90s. Word on the streets is that at some point, the insane gangster disciples' numbers were so deep in the jails, and their membership on the streets had grown so large beyond the confines of Cabrini Green that the chairman Larry Hoover issued a memo admonishing his disciples from creating cliques and crews that separated themselves from each other and reminding them that nothing, including an I, comes before GD. Right before a parole board hearing in 1995, Larry Hoover was indicted on federal RICO charges. In 1997, he was convicted, sentenced to life, on top of the 150 to 200 years he was sentenced to for the murder charge he caught in 1973, and transferred from the prison in Vienna, Illinois, where he had free rein to run the GDs, from behind the walls to a supermax facility with virtually no contact with the outside world. We'll discuss the Vienna tapes, which were the conversations that the FBI recorded through wiretaps of Larry Hoover's visitors inside prison, in another video. For now, just know this: Stevie Wonder could see that in 1997, Larry Hoover was a drug dealer running the gangster disciples from prison, and all of that growth and development talk was just that, talk. At that point in his life, the man had not found redemption, so he was transferred to the Supermax prison in ADX Florence, on lockdown for 23 hours a day, where notorious inmates like Joaquin, El Chapo Guzman, and the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, are housed. For his part, Don Smokey was released from prison in 1998 after his conviction for the murder of Don Dirk's homie, George Bailey, and he had not found redemption either. As we mentioned before, Don Smokey spent most of his life in jail. In 2001, he caught a gun case and went back to prison. According to testimony from Keith McCants that we'll dive into deeper in another video, Don Smokey was an active board member of the GDs, doing dirty shit inside of the prison system, until Don Smokey's release in around 2013 or 14. On August 17, 2023, the Chicago Sun-Times reported a sweeping federal investigation of a crew of gangster disciples leaders ended Thursday with a life sentence for a Naperville man, Frank Smith, who is among 5 regional and national leaders of the gang sentenced this year on racketeering charges. Smith, 50, Walter Griffin, Sean Clemon, and Dominique Maxwell were convicted by a jury after a 6-week trial, and Anthony Dobbins pleaded guilty. All got life terms except for Dobbins, who was sentenced to 32 years in prison. Clemon and Maxwell, on orders from Smith, fatally shot a gangster disciples member at a Missouri park in April 2018, prosecutors said. They said Smith texted "Mike Tyson punch out" to Maxwell prior to the shooting. The following month, Griffin and Dobbins drove from southern Illinois to the south side to kill a gangster disciples board member because he opposed their leadership positions, according to prosecutors, who said Dobbins shot the man in the face and back. Law enforcement has delivered a devastating blow to the gangster disciples' criminal enterprise, Acting Assistant Attorney General Nicole M. Argentieri said of the sentences. According to the indictment charging the men, Dobbins told Griffin in September 2014 that imprisoned gangster disciples founder Larry Hoover had appointed them as board members for the gang. In 2021, Hoover's lawyer said he doubted Hoover could have promoted gang members in prison while he was being held under high security. And if you want to see what evidence the government had that Larry Hoover is still running the GDs from a supermax prison, let's take a look at the indictment. On or about December 28, 2009, Dobbins sent a letter to a gangster disciples member expressing Dobbins' intention to become the first board member from the area of East St. Louis, Illinois. On or about September 1, 2014, Dobbins informed Griffin that Larry Hoover had appointed both Dobbins and Griffin as board members. Pause. If you're thinking, wait a minute, who told Anthony Dobbins that Larry Hoover had appointed him and Warren Griffin to the board of directors? You're not the only one, but let's continue. On or about October 11, 2014, Dobbins and Griffin discussed challenges to their authority from subordinate gangster disciples members, with Dobbins indicating that a particular member should be dealt with violently if he continued to resist. On or about November 1, 2014, Dobbins and Griffin discussed the current roster of board members, which included themselves and Smith. Smith is Frank Smith, aka Lil Frank, or Red Beard, who was a GD board member for a long time, with close ties to Larry Hoover, but a rival against Don Smokey. The indictment against Smith, Dobbins, and Griffin is crazy. Reading through the indictment is like reading a screenplay to the most unbelievable gangster movie ever made. Dobbins and Griffin planned and executed a lot of murders, not just Don Smokey's. My best guess is Frank Smith convinced Anthony Dobbins and Warren Griffin that somehow, someway, he got word from Larry Hoover that he had appointed them to his board of directors. And then, Dobbins and Griffin start murdering anybody that questions their leadership, including Frank Smith's rival, Don Smokey. On or about May 18, 2018, Griffin and Dobbins shot and killed Ernest Wilson, also known as Don Smokey, a rival Gangster Disciples board member in Chicago, Illinois. They set up a meeting with Don Smokey and ambushed him on the corner of 71st and Euclid, right by one of my favorite pizza spots, Italian Fiesta. How many murders is Larry Hoover responsible for? Let me know in the comments section whether you think Larry Hoover is still calling shots for the Gangster Disciples from a supermax prison, or is he a changed man? And please, ring that notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos from the 2 video series we're currently producing on Larry Hoover and the worst places to live in Chicago.